I love using a product called Azure Boards. And so I figured this would be a great a thing that I wanted to share with some of y'all about a little bit. So thanks a lot for joining. So I have my eyes open here at the on the Q&A window. Feel free to enter any questions here, and I'll address them as they come up throughout the webinar. And I think you can also raise your hand on Zoom. So as soon as you raise your hand, I'll try to keep an eye here, and I'll allow you to talk. So, and you know, we'll approach this. I like to approach this as much as a conversation where possible, right? I don't think I can unmute everyone, but please feel free to enter your questions, and I'm going to try to address them as they come up. So let's see here. All right. So here's the ground I want to cover. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the foundations of Agile, right? What does it mean to be Agile? It's a word that's thrown around a lot. I want to talk a little bit about the pitfalls of traditional project management. I want to talk about what makes Agile teams so great. And then I'm going to talk about actually using Azure Boards to plan Agile work and to manage Agile work. And so let me start with this question, right? What does it mean to be Agile? And like I said, this has become a buzzword. You know, we hear this on TV, companies talking about how they're Agile, and it's used as a synonym for being flexible, for being lean, for being innovative. But what does it actually mean in a practical context? And there are real practical implications here. So the story of Agile, it starts with this document here, right? The requirements document. So requirements document is this big, hefty document that documents all of the things that we need our software solution to be able to do, right? And this is typically written by a project manager at the start of one of these big, hefty projects called, let's see here, waterfall projects. So waterfall projects, they're called waterfall projects because they look like these waterfalls, right? And so at the beginning of a waterfall-style project, we're writing this huge, big document, right? So it's probably not a big pile of papers anymore. It's probably a spreadsheet, but the essence is the same. It's a big, hefty document with a big list of requirements. We design that solution, we develop that solution, we test the solution, and all the way here at the bottom, we deploy the solution. So this is a lot of steps, right? It's a lot of things you got to do to deliver a working digital product here. And so it takes super long, right? And there's a few issues that come with this type of delivery. So first of all, you're going to risk the user actually changing requirements, right? So at the start of the project here, you're going to be talking to your user, and your user is going to be telling you what it is that they want. Well, like I said, it takes a long time to design, develop, QA, deploy. In most situations, this takes months. In some situations, when you're deploying something big, it can take years. So within a couple years, like how many times have you changed your mind? I've already changed my mind a couple times about what I want to have for lunch. So these are requirements that change fast, and when you're designing something here at month 1, it's extremely likely that by the time you deploy, your requirements are probably going to be out of date. There's very little room for experimentation here. You really can't afford to try anything risky or try anything new because time is money. And like I said, if this is going to take you 3 months to deliver or 6 months to deliver or 2 years to deliver, you want to deliver nothing more and nothing less than exactly what you're sure that the user wants. There's enough risk here, right? So you can't try out risky new ideas that you're not sure if they're going to work, because 6 months in, you've delivered something, and if it's not what the user wants, well, you've just lost 6 months of your time. And last, this is a big one here. How hard is it to actually deliver on time? So when you're a project manager managing a project like this, designing a solution, you're collecting all your requirements here at the beginning. You have to promise a deadline either to your manager or to your customers or to whoever, right? We all promise deadlines to people. And how do you know how long it's going to take to QA to test a solution when you haven't even designed it yet at the start of the project? Well, at best you can have a guesstimate, right? And this is why waterfall style projects, they're very often late and they're very often over budget, because we're estimating months ahead of time. So very hard to deliver. Keeping my eyes here on the Q&A. So see, the problem with a requirements document is that it's not written by the user. It's typically written by a project manager who might be talking to users or might be interpreting, predicting what the user wants. It's not actually written by the developer either. And the user doesn't actually talk to the developer in any of these steps here, right? So where's the user talking to the developer? It's just not happening. And it's kind of surprising when you think about it. It sounds like there should probably be a very active conversation between the user who knows what they want and the developer who's actually building the solution. So why don't we start, let's start over here. Let's start with getting the user side of the story directly to the developer. Let's just ask the user, what's your story? So you have your user story. So I have my little user here on the left-hand side of my slide. I'm gonna ask the user, what's your story? So this is a user of an imaginary application for an application that books airline tickets. So let's ask this user what their story is. So the user says, as a customer or as a user of this application, I want Siri to be able to share updates on my flight status so I can get updates while I drive to the airport. So you see, it's an actual story, right? It's an actual situation. It's an actual problem that the user's dealing with, and a potential solution to that problem. And that's a template, right? So that's a template for your user story. So as a user, I want or need such and such so that I can such and such. And the advantage of putting yourselves in the shoe of the user when you're documenting as a replacement for the requirement is you're putting yourself in the shoes of the user and you're thinking about what the user actually wants. And let's get this user actually sitting within the same team that's actually making the solution. So in this hypothetical situation here, an airplane ticket booking app, maybe you can't have a single user here sitting in the room with all of the development team just because it's a full-time job, right? So you're usually going to have a representative, someone who's out there always talking to users and documenting user stories, and they're maintaining a list of these user stories, right? A prioritized list of these user stories. And let's put this user in the same room as the rest of the team. So the developer is here in the team. You have here on the upper left-hand corner, you have a QA guy here. You see the QA guy here at the right side. He has his thumbs down. He's saying you could do better. And you have a servant leader. And a servant leader is just going to be your facilitator, right? So he's going to take the shoes of your traditional project manager. He's facilitating this team. He's making sure that this team has everything that they need. He's making sure that there's no blockers getting in the way of developing a solution. Let me ask another question. So why do we have to make this big document or this big spreadsheet before we start delivering working functionality, right? Why do we have to do that big waterfall? So why don't we just deliver small, usable chunks of functionality fast and regularly? So the Agile process, it's based around the user story, and it's based around sprints. Sprints, sometimes it's called an iteration. It's the same thing. It's a fixed period of time, somewhere between a week or 2 weeks, probably not more. It starts to get a little bit long beyond 2 weeks. At the beginning of your sprint, you're picking a user story out of a list of user stories, your backlog, and you're starting to work on it, right? This development team, they're all sitting here in a room, and they're going to work on this. They're going to develop it, they're going to test it, and they're going to deliver it to the hands of the user. So at the end of your 1 week or 2 weeks, you're going to deliver working functionality. And it's going to be small, little, tiny pieces of functionality, right? Like a Siri command. Like, hey, Siri, can you update me on my flight status? So at the end of your sprint, you're going to start again. And you do this in perpetuity, right? You're going to have sprint after sprint after sprint. So at the beginning of this second sprint here, you already have some basic Siri functionality. You might want to make that Siri functionality. It's funny, my Siri just turned on here just because I was saying Siri so much. So you're going to have some basic Siri functionality. Maybe you can make it more sophisticated. Maybe for this next sprint here, you can actually make it help you actually book flights, right? So the point is, you're delivering really minimal functionality, right? It might be your minimum viable product, and you're gonna continue iterating on that. So to reiterate on some of the common problems that we've reviewed and the solutions that you're going to get from Agile style of delivery. So delivering outdated requirements, right? Remember at the top I said when you've collected all your requirements at month 1, well, month 6, once you've deployed your solution, how sure are you that those requirements are still up to date? With very fickle users, the airline industry is changing fast. How do you know that that's exactly what the users still want? Well, with Agile delivery, you can change your stories at any time, really, anytime. So anytime here at the beginning of the sprint, you can change a story. You can add to the list of stories. You can remove from the list of stories. So it makes it a lot easier, right? So late deployments, you might be facing late deployments in a traditional waterfall context. Well, within the Agile context, you're going to have working functionality in a week or 2. And that's crazy. When you compare it to these timelines, these year-long timelines, you get an actual working product in front of your user for feedback within a week or 2. That's great. And you might have a lack of innovation, right? You might be delivering the same old things just because it's too costly to experiment. Well, here you can afford to experiment a lot more, because if the time lost for a user story that you said, I'm taking a risk here with this user story, I'm trying something different, I'm trying something new, and let's say it doesn't catch, let's say the user didn't really like it. Well, you've lost a week or 2 at most, right? Trying to see here if I can see your hands being raised. I realize that. There you go. So just another comment here is you're getting a better product market fit here, because you're putting a product out in front of your user fast, and you can get actual feedback on your minimum, on your MVP, right? On some basic functionality. Maybe you hear from your users that that Siri functionality, that they would have liked to have it work just a little bit differently, or like I said, maybe you're looking forward to that solution that's going to allow you to actually book a flight. So you're getting actual feedback rather than hypothetically documenting requirements, a long list of requirements at the start of the project. So you're going to have more certainty that your users are actually going to like and use your product. And you're actually going to get confirmation, right? If your users are using that basic functionality, you have the realest form of validation possible, right? An actual customer, an actual user. Let me stop there. Any questions? All right, let's move on. So let's a lot of this is very hypothetical and maybe a little bit vague. So I'm going to walk through the actual process of planning work, of managing work, and I'm going to use Azure boards. There's a bunch of tools out there to help you manage this kind of project. So I'm just going to be using Microsoft's Azure board. It's a great product. There's others out there. So planning work. So all of your planned work sits in what we call the product backlog. So I've been talking about this big list of user stories. It's prioritized. So you're going to have a big backlog of user stories, and a lot of user stories make up a product features a product feature, and a lot of features make up an epic, right? An epic is a big story. And on the other side of your user story here to the left, you have tasks. So tasks are the actual actionable pieces of work that need to be done in order for you to deliver a working user story. So let me open up my Azure DevOps here. So Azure DevOps is for the purposes of this conversation, it's really just a portal for you to access Azure Boards, this tool. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and switch over to my Azure DevOps screen here. All right, so I'm going to count on your help here. If you don't see my screen, please raise your hand or enter something here in the Q&A. All right. So this is your Azure DevOps portal. And like I said, your DevOps portal, it actually houses a few different Microsoft products. So I'm going to be covering just boards. And so when you log in here, you're going to have several different projects. Projects are just groupings of all of the work that you need to manage. And so I have a demo project here for us to play around with. So I'm going to open up my my demo project. So like I said, on the left hand side here, you have all of these different DevOps products. So you have code repos, you have pipelines to deploy from one environment to the other, test plans. So we're just looking at boards, and that's your Agile work management tool. So I'm going to click on Azure Boards here. Azure Boards, this is going to take me to a list of work items. And this is an unorganized list of all my work items, my stories, my tasks, my epics. So I want my organized view here, right? That prioritized list that I was talking about. I'm going to hit my backlogs. So my backlogs, like I said, this is my prioritized list of user stories, right? So I have here, as an admin, I want to update flight fares so that I can accommodate variable, et cetera, right? And so I have a bunch of these user stories that are prioritized in order of, this is the one I want to deliver first, this is the one I want to deliver second, this is the one I want to deliver third. So I can pick here in this drop-down stories, I can pick out my features, and I can pick out my epics. So I'm going to start here at the epics just to show you what I'm talking about. So I can expand this list here. So my security epic, that has a whole bunch of user stories focused on security. I'm going to drop down here. So you have my security policies. My flight epic has the flight listings and the itinerary listings. I'm going to expand one more time. And now I have all my user stories. So like I said, a lot of user stories make up a feature. Let me go back to my stories here. So this is the most important backlog, just because everything that we do here is around the user story, right? I'm going to add a new work item here to the bottom. The way this works is, I'll show you an example. So as a hungry human, right, in the shoes of the user, I want an apple pie so that I can eat it. All right, so that's my story this afternoon. I'm going to add that to the bottom here. So so that's how you write a user story, and that's how you upload it here to the bottom of your backlog. All right, let me go back to my slideshow. All right, once more. Please raise your hand if you can't see my screen. All right, so remember when I was talking about this guy here, the waterfall, and one of the complaints that I had about this was, you know, I've managed projects like this. Well, when I'm up here at the beginning, I really have no idea how long this QA step is going to take, right? It's a guesstimate at best. It might be an educated guesstimate. Maybe I've done this kind of project, you know, 20 different times, or I've done it for years, and so I have an educated opinion about how long this QA is going to take. Well, the real problem with this is we're actually really bad at estimating time. It's just how the human mind works. It's very bad at predicting how long things are going to take. And so we want to find some other way to build predictability into our timelines and our deadlines. The way we do that in the Agile context is with story points and velocity. So those are two pieces of Agile lingo that you're going to hear. A lot of people who work in Agile environments are going to talk about story points and velocity all the time. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what that is. So the story point, it's a measurement of the level of effort required to deliver a user story. So a couple of factors that go into level of effort. So the complexity of the work involved, the amount of work there is to do, risks and uncertainties. So this is not a measure of how long it takes to do something. So this is actually really important because, like I said, the whole point is here, we want to move away from, I think it's going to take us 2 weeks to do or 2 months to do the Q&A. Just because we don't know. And there's, it really depends on who we have on the QA team. Maybe we have some QA people who are super fast. Maybe we have some QA people who are not as fast, or who are new to this type of work, or who are new to this industry, who have never tested a flight ticket app before. So one thing that we can all agree on, though, is the level of effort involved, right? Regardless of the amount of time it takes. So a couple more concepts here. If you're not confused yet, a couple more concepts that I want to throw in there. So stories are larger or smaller relative to each other in terms of story points. And it's measured on a Fibonacci sequence. So let me go back to my backlog here. All right. So I've been asking for people to raise their hand whenever see my screen. So I'm going to ask for, I hope there is a volunteer out there. So I'm going to ask for a volunteer to help me estimate the amount of story points for one of these user stories here. So can I get a volunteer? I'm looking at the hands being raised or at the Q&A. All right, and we don't necessarily need a volunteer, so I'm not seeing anyone offer their help, and that's fine here. So I wanted to show how we estimate the size of a user story in an actual Agile team, and so I'm just going to go here. I'm going to show you. I'm going to do this by myself. I'm going to talk to myself a little bit. So I'm going to start with this user story here that we wrote earlier. As a hungry human, I want an apple pie so I can eat it. So I'm going to open this user story, and you see this little field here. It says story points. So what we're going to do is, as a team, this development team all sitting in a room together, like I said, the user representative, the developer, QA, we're going to set a baseline for level of effort. So we're going to all agree that picking an apple off of a tree, this is a very basic task that we can all understand the level of effort involved. We can understand it's not very complex. There's not a lot of risks. There's no uncertainties. We're all going to agree as a team, this is our baseline. That is worth 1 story point. Right. So on that Fibonacci sequence, right, that 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, how much level of effort is involved in making an apple pie relative to picking an apple off of a tree? Well, so this is where the conversation starts within the team, right? So I might say, an apple pie, it's a pretty complicated thing to do because I'm not so sure of the recipe. And so there's some uncertainty involved there. And you have to pick up a bunch of apples off of the tree, and you have to cut up a bunch of apples. And so, it's a very repetitive task. And by the way, there's some complexity too, because you have to operate a complicated piece of machinery, an oven. I never use an oven. Maybe I get delivery every day. And so this is a pretty complex user story, right? So relative to picking an apple off of a tree on that scale of 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, I'm going to say this is worth like an 8. It's a pretty complicated story. And this is where my volunteer would have pitched in, right? My volunteer would have said, "Are you kidding me? An oven, that's a really easy thing to operate. And by the way, that recipe is super basic. It's just apples, sugar, whatever, et cetera, et cetera." I actually don't know the recipe. So that person might say, "Oh, it's 3." So we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this user story, and we're going to debate until we reach some consensus. So we're not voting. We're reaching a consensus, right? And maybe I talk up my volunteer a little bit from a 3 to a 5, and my volunteer is going to talk me down from an 8 to a 5. So we're going to agree this is worth a 5. So 5 story points. I'm just going to say that. All right, I'm going to go back here to my slideshow. All right, so this is all about building predictability into your delivery, right? So let me go back. That was a quick slide here. So let me go back to my DevOps screen. I think I see a hand raised here. Was that Bill Carson trying to talk? I don't think so. All right. All right, let me go back to my DevOps here. All right. So now that I've estimated the size of the story here, right? I want to plan my next sprint, right? So my sprint 2. If I'm assuming that I'm actually in sprint 2 right now here, right? So my backlog, and just if you didn't catch this here, I'm going into my sprint backlog. My sprint backlog is just within sprint 2. These are all the user stories I want to tackle within sprint 2, right? And so you see some of these I've already completed them, so they're closed. This one here I've just started, so it's active. And this one here I haven't started yet, so it's new. So I'm going to take this user story here actually that I just wrote, the Hungry Human. I'm going to open up this little planning pane here. So planning. I'm going to drag this user story here into sprint 2. Or since I'm in sprint 2 right now, I'm going to drag it into sprint 3 actually. So I'm going to go into my sprint 3. And so here I have my 5 story points, right? Let me go and I'm realizing now that I unmuted Bill Carson. I'm gonna mute you again, Bill. Good to see you here, Bill. All right, so I have my 5 story points. Historically, I know how many story points I'm able to handle in one sprint, and I have I have a little dashboard here that I made. So I'm going to go into my dashboard. My dashboard here, it documents how many story points I do every sprint. So that's what we call our velocity, right? So sprint 1, I'm seeing here completed. I completed 16 story points in sprint 1. Sprint 2, I'm still working through it. I've completed 8 so far. I've planned for 16, so I'm halfway through the sprint. So I'm not going to, so when I go to plan my sprint 3 here, I'm going to try real hard not to exceed 16 story points, right? Because I know that I can reliably deliver 16 story points every sprint. I have very reliable information for that. I have actual practical history, practical experience. And the more sprints you go through, the better data you're going to have about how fast your team can deliver on story points, right? And so the way this helps you deliver things on time. So remember this backlog here. I'm going to pick out my epics. What this helps me to do is when I go to drop down this booking and packages epic here, and I have my online ticket booking, I want to promise to my users, I want to promise to my manager, I want to promise to Wall Street that I'm going to deliver online ticket booking within a certain period of time. Let's say 6 months from now. Well, I have all the data necessary to make a very reliable promise, right? So I know how long a sprint takes. It takes me 2 weeks to go through a sprint. I know how many story points I can deliver every sprint. So each of these user stories here, it has a size, it has a level of effort. And so with just those two pieces of information, I can add up here. Let's suppose that all these user stories together, they add up to 32 story points, let's say. So I know that I can do 16 story points every sprint. That means that in 2 sprints, I can deliver all of this functionality here, right? So you can give a very reliable promise that this is going to be ready in 2 sprints. And maybe you want to be safe. Maybe you want to promise 3 sprints. Well, you're only 2 weeks off, right? It's actually pretty close. So this is how we build predictability into Agile delivery. All right. We'll go back to my slideshow. All right, managing work. So how do you know a user story is actually done, right? And like I said, this is about putting working functionality in the hands of the user. So, well, your user story is done once you've actually delivered working functionality into the hands of the user, right? So you have to ask yourself under which criteria the user would accept this as actual working functionality that the user is happy with. And so you have something called the acceptance criteria. And it's a test to make sure that your user is happy with the functionality that you've delivered. So under a specific circumstance, when the user takes a specific action, she needs to see a measurable result. So that's your acceptance criteria. So I said specific and measurable, right? Because this is what's going to instruct your development team when they're ready to close the story. So let me go back to my user story here. Stop my share. Go back to my Azure DevOps story. So I have a story here that's a little bit more, fleshed out than my Hungry Human apple pie story. So this is Siri to share updates on my flight status. And I have my acceptance criteria down here. So under a specific circumstance, when I do this, when I talk to Siri, I ask Siri, what is my flight status? Where is my flight? Has my flight changed? Then I need to have an answer from Siri within a couple seconds that your flight is on time, or your flight is delayed, or your flight is ahead. So notice here how much we focus on actual functionality, right? This is something that a user can use. All right. So boards, right? So you now have this test that allows you to understand if you've delivered a user story or not. So back and forth between screens here. All right, so here's my Siri story. I'm going to go into my sprint backlog. This is the backlog that I was looking at a little bit earlier, and I'm going to go. So I've actually fleshed out here the actual tasks that I need to deliver on this user story here, right? And this is the actual technical work that needs to be done. And I'm going to go into my task board here. So this facilitates your morning meetings, your morning stand-up meetings, where you're all getting together and discussing what it is that you're working on. So, as a team, we're going to go through these tasks, right? And I've started out the day with this task number 56 here to deliver on this user story 15. Just going to drag it here to active. That means I'm working on it today. So once I finish this here, at the end of the day, I'm going to move it to close. So once I finish both these tasks here, I can update the story here to closed, right? And let me show you my user story boards. So this is your task board for the details, the nitty gritty, the sprint by sprint. Well, you're going to have a backlog board of all the user stories as well. And they're my stories, or my boards are over here, right? So this is my boards of the new, active, and closed. And these are customizable columns depending on, if you want to have a QA step here, maybe it's new, active, testing, and then finally delivered into the hands of the user. And so I have my filter here for the sprint by sprint. Maybe I want just the current iteration, or the current sprint. Maybe I want to see all my user stories. And let's grab current iteration again, just to show you the example here. So user story 41. I'm going to start developing this user story here and move it from new to active. And while I'm working on it, it stays inactive. I move it to, once I've taken a look at these acceptance criteria here, I say, yeah, this is working. It's been tested. It's been delivered into the hands of the users. I can move it to close. So that's how I'm managing my work on a sprint-to-sprint basis. So that's really what I wanted to share with you. So, if there's anything that you take away from this conversation, I want you to remember a couple of things. So Agile delivery, it can help you experiment and innovate. So this is the big one, right? These big waterfall projects, they're very, very time consuming, very costly. You can't afford to innovate. You can't afford to experiment. So, if you're in a context, a big traditional waterfall style company, and you're having trouble innovating, you're having trouble experimenting, sometimes you just have to set up the processes necessary to encourage your teammates or your team members or your company to try new things, right? And this is an interesting one because we tend to oppose process to creativity. We tend to put those on opposite sides of the spectrum. But you need that process in order to allow people to innovate, right? You need to give people that room, and you need to decrease the cost of failure, right? That's what it's all about. So, second point, driving product market fit. So when you're actually putting, very basic functionality in the hands of your users, and you're iterating on that every 2 weeks, or you're iterating on it regularly, you have a much better idea of what it is that the user actually wants because you validated it with a user. You're not guessing, you're not planning a year ahead of time. This is what I think the user wants, and a year later you put it in the hands of the users. But you're not so sure if the user wanted it or not, right? When you're just thinking about it in your head. Well, when you're actually just delivering every week, every 2 weeks, you have actual user feedback. You can deliver usable functionality faster, right? That's a huge one. So for anyone who's struggling with these big projects where you're promising a deadline 6 months from now to either to Wall Street or to your users or to your managers or to anyone, that's a frustrating thing to say. That's a difficult conversation to have. Like, yeah, I can get you this in 6 months. Right, 6 months, wow, 6 months. I don't even know if I'm gonna want the same thing within 6 months. I don't know if it's even gonna be applicable anymore. Well, within the Agile context, you're gonna deliver it every week, every 2 weeks. And so that's actual usable functionality. It might not be complete, but it's a piece of functionality that's delivered a lot faster. And the last thing, using story points and velocity, you're gonna promise really predictable timelines, right? You're not guesstimating how long that QA step is gonna take. You have actual data that helps you understand historically how fast you've delivered and how fast you can deliver moving forward. So that's what I wanted to share with you. So I want to open it up here for questions. I want to ask, is anyone facing any of these challenges that we've talked about? Does anyone want to talk about specific problems that they're facing that we can hash out as a case study, or just general questions about anything that I've just discussed? So I think I see a hand raised here. So, all right, Carla, can you talk?
Hi, can you hear me?
Hey, Carla.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
Oh, okay. Just wanted to ask, I don't really have much experience in Agile, and that's why I was interested in joining today. And I'm just wondering if you have any more pointers in terms of like, how do you determine the user story, or the story points rather, like, because I think that that's maybe something that comes with experience, or I'm not sure. Do you have more pointers for that one?
So story points, that's an excellent question. Story points, it's something that that your team gets better and better at as you go, right? So this example that I was talking about here, it's from one sprint to the next. In sprint 3, your team is still not going to be excellent at estimating story points. They're going to be variable opinions on that apple pie. You have 3 different developers on the team. That one developer is going to say, I don't know so much about recipes. I don't know so much about the tools that I'm using to make these recipes. And for them, it's going to be an 8 because there's all these uncertainties. Well, as time goes by, as you start using the same tools over and over again, so like ovens, for example, right? That developer who at first would have had a lot of trouble estimating or a lot of trouble delivering a user story, they're going to have fewer and fewer uncertainties, right, in delivering. They're going to get better at operating ovens, and they're going to be better and better at saying the level of estimating the level of effort involved in delivering a user story, right? So estimating story points for user stories, I guess what I'm trying to get at is it's a learning process, and every sprint your team is going to get more and more used to this very vague concept, right? It's a very conceptual thing. And they're going to get better and better and more precise because there's fewer and fewer uncertainties involved. So I don't know, Carla, if that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, I think it definitely answers my question. It comes down to just experience and doing it over and over again, so you can be better and more accurate in the.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. And by the way, this baseline that I said, from one story. So we said one story point is picking an apple off of a tree. Every team is going to have a different baseline, right? So the story points in company A are not going to be the same thing as story points in company B. So that velocity, it's not a number that you can compare because the baseline is different, because the developers understand a different baseline. And the more stories you estimate, the more body of work you have to estimate relative to, right? So if I'm in sprint 3, I look back at my sprint 1 and I had 5 user stories in there that I can compare new user stories to. I can say, oh, this new user story here that I'm planning for sprint 3, it looks kind of like that one user story I had back in sprint 1. And you can compare it to that. You can say sprint 1, I gave that one 5 story points. And so this one is a little bit more complex in such and such a way. So I'm going to give this an 8. So, but yes, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right that that it comes with experience. So I'm seeing here a question from Bill Carson. Bill, thanks again for joining. So Bill's asking me if I can talk a little bit more about resource allocation with this approach. And so this approach is useful for you to understand within a fixed team how fast you're able to deliver, right? So let's suppose in this imaginary world here of this ticket booking flight, let's suppose it's a team of 4 people and they're able to deliver 16 story points every sprint. And I use that example, right, of some feature that I want to promise to my users. Hey, I want to send out a digital advertisement. Hey, look out for my online booking app 3 months from now. And let's suppose that, 3 months is actually too fast for my team. And go back to maybe my marketing team said that to our users on Facebook, and they go back to my developers and they say, 3 months, like we can't deliver. We don't have that kind of velocity. We're going to have to work overtime every single day. It's just not a sustainable pace. Well, you have some experience here, right? You have some data. You know that 4 developers with that skill set that they have, they can deliver 16 story points a sprint. And let's say you have to double down on that velocity. Well, maybe you need to deliver 32 story points every sprint. So in that situation, what you're going to do is you're going to say, I need to hire 4 more people with exactly the same skill set, maybe 5 more people, right? Because it takes them a while to reach that velocity, because they need to learn the tools, they need to learn the systems. So that's how you're going to think a little bit about resource allocation. You get a general idea of how many story points a single developer can deliver, or a single worker in your team can deliver. I've been using software. It doesn't have to be software. Apple pies, it's actually a totally legitimate example. So, if I want to deliver 200 apple pies by the end of the month, I know how many apple pies 3 people can deliver. So how many people do I need to hire in order to deliver those 200 or 300 apple pies at the end of the month? So it's just a question of math here, right? The point is you have more and more data to make these kinds of decisions. So I hope, Bill, that answers your question. All right. Any other questions? So let me ask a question to everyone, if you're able to answer this question. So, what are the specific case studies that brought you to this webinar? Are there specific problems that you're facing that I can brainstorm here? Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone's time. I am going to ask Ruthie to send out my email address to anyone who is here. And I'm actually super passionate about innovation and about processes that enable innovation. We talk a lot about how do we build a culture that enables teams to innovate and to try new things. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart. And I love talking about it. So if you just want to chit chat about any of this, reach out to me. I'm happy to talk through specific case studies or specific problems that you might be dealing with. I think my profile has been my LinkedIn profile has been sent out also with the invite to this, but I'll make sure that we get my email address, my LinkedIn over to anybody who participated, who might want to talk about this a little bit more. So really appreciate it.